There is another judiciary issue that's being debated in Albany, and that's the future of the Commission on Judicial Nomination. The commission was created in 1977 after a couple of ugly judicial elections. That's right, the public used to vote for judges directly the way we do for politicians. For years, reformers wanted to change that system, and finally, a task force that included Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Cy Vance Sr., and Mario Cuomo wrote a report for then Governor Hugh Carey suggesting the state create this Commission on Judicial Nomination. And that's been in place for about 45 years, 46 years. But now the legislature and the governor want to make some changes. And joining us with his thoughts on the commission, and perhaps if we have time, the late state budget, is Deputy Senate Majority Leader Mike Gianaris. So good to see you.
Hey, Susan, how are you?
Good. So let's talk about this Commission on Judicial Nomination. What is it that you're looking to do?
Well, I think what we're contemplating, and nothing's been put on paper yet, is just a simpler stripped-down version where the governor gets to appoint or nominate whoever she wants, and the Senate has the power to advise and consent on that nomination, just the way it's done at the federal government level. Because what tends to happen, and what's happened in recent weeks and months, is a governor can feel constricted by the choices given to her, and in fact, with the previous nomination, one of the complaints we heard was, well, these are the only choices before me, and so I had to pick a particular person.
Now, we did just hear today hours of people saying how great Rowan Wilson is. And I'm sure tomorrow we're going to hear hours of people saying how great Caitlin Halligan is. And both of them were on the commission's list, so how bad could it be?
Well, neither of them was on the commission's prior list. And that's an interesting point because by news accounts, not only Rowan Wilson, but Jenny Rivera, a number of sitting Court of Appeals judges applied for this position when it was open back in the fall. And somehow Rowan Wilson, who has been on the chief judge list before, was not on the chief judge list then, and now is back on the chief judge list again. It's arbitrary and it's not transparent. No one knows what goes on behind these doors. And if you don't think there's politics involved in how the commission does its work, you're not paying attention.
But it does seem to be less political, or at least less politicized, than it is at the federal level. And what you're saying is that a Democratic governor will pick a Democratic judge to nominate to the head of the Court of Appeals. It looks to me, when I look at the Supreme Court of the United States, that it's much more partisan and politicized than the Court of Appeals.
Well, the U.S. Supreme Court's a particularly extreme and bad example. I grant you that. But our Court of Appeals under Janet DeFiore was horribly politicized and divisive. And I think that's widely recognized by so many experts who follow the state's highest court. The division among the judges was significant. The direction the court took was disturbing, and in many ways, not just the ideology of the court, but the workload of the court was less than it had been historically. This was, with respect to the worst Court of Appeals administration we've had since the time of the elections began.
Now, I'm going to say something that you might look askance at me for saying, but there were definitely some ethical issues under Janet DeFiore, but one of the biggest issues for lawmakers is her decision on redistricting. Does that factor into this at all?
No, not at all. I mean, I could disagree with that decision, which I do, but it's one of many things that she did wrong. Never mind the outright potential corruption with the security detail that she maintained after she left office. And by the way, who at the OCA approved that? We still haven't gotten real answers from that because the OCA is a black hole. That's a whole separate issue we have to deal with.
That's the Office of Court Administration.
Right.
They basically run the court.
But let's talk about this commission for a second. We're talking about how these judges get selected. And like I said, if you don't think the commission members are subject to influence and the politics of the court system, then you're just not paying attention. What the difference is you have no idea who's interviewing, how they get on the list, what the internal deliberations are. It's lack of transparency. And let's just talk about the quality also, because you brought that up earlier. Yeah. This commission, in whatever iteration it's been in since the 70s, has presented 6 names that made it to the floor of the Senate for confirmation. 1 was rejected, 2 resigned in disgrace. So you tell me how great a track record that is.
Almost every bar association, including the Fund for Modern Courts, has said that abolishing the commission is a bad idea. And one of the reasons for that is partisanship. I mean, you can sort of quibble over the nuances of whether or not Hector LaSalle was too, right-wing on this issue or that issue, but it's not as partisan as the way we pick Supreme Court justices? And what if you have a Republican governor and you don't have a Republican and you don't have a Democratic supermajority in the Senate? I mean, it's going to be a whole different ball of wax.
Well, I'll tell you this, because I disagree with the premise. Okay, the Supreme Court reflects the divisive politics of the nation. The Court of Appeals, under this iteration of the previous administration, reflected the divisive politics of New York State. And so here, as you well know, currently at this point in history, the Democrats have control, and a lot of the division is between Andrew Cuomo type Democrats, who, by the way, Janet DeFiore, Madeline Singers, these people all were consistent with that particular ideology, and other types of Democrats who other judges might reflect. So that division exists. Just because there's not a D or an R next to the name doesn't mean it's not political. And in fact, what you're seeing now is the legal establishment, which we have seen now going back several months, is all defending their turf. A lot of these groups, the New York County Bar Association, for example, has been very active in condemning all sorts of things, are currying favor with the judges they appear before on a regular basis. So give me a break that that's not, doesn't have its own politics and its own manipulations that are taking place. All we're saying is this is the governor's nomination. You know, governors like Andrew Cuomo would manipulate the commission and get their picks on there anyway. Why not just let the governor pick who she wants? Everyone will know who it is. It's her choice. She could pick from the whole world of possibilities. And the Senate will advise and consent on that nomination, and that will be that.
We're out of time. People are talking in my ear. So when are we going to see a budget?
Hopefully soon.
Well, soon as in a week from today, or?
Look, if everything comes together quickly, it could be next week sometime, but if it doesn't,
who knows?
It's anybody's guess.
All right, we have been talking to the Deputy Senate Majority Leader, Mike Gianaris. Great to see you.
Thank you, Susan.